It's not really, China versus the United States or, United States versus Russia. It's really the governments of China versus the people of China. It's the government of the United States, organized crime system versus the people of the United States. And the governments just play each other against one another to give the population a boogeyman that then unites the population behind the government to save them from the artificially created boogeyman.
Hello and welcome to another edition of our community interview series at Anarchapulco 24/7 365. Today I have two very special guests with us, Tim Picciott and excuse me, but Etienne de la Boetie squared. And so, gentlemen, you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself and we'll go from there. So, who wants to go first?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm Tim Picciott, the Liberty Advisor. Today we're going to talk a lot about the Federal Reserve. So some of my Federal Reserve, bona fides would be: I graduated in 2008, right at a great time to try to get a job in finance. And while in 2008, I was actually on Federal Reserve Challenge team where my classmates won the national competition against Harvard, Yale, MIT. So I was given the full brainwash indoctrination version of how the Federal Reserve works. Also a certified financial planner. I was running my school's endowment fund back in 2007, 2008, put the entire financial portion in cash. I mentioned certified financial planner. Helping people right now who got into Bitcoin early, different strategies where they can legally avoid taxes. Also helping people get some freedom with inside their retirement accounts by letting them do more advanced things like getting crypto in there, helping protect against what I eventually see is coming. And so sort of my main wheelhouse is talking about the Federal Reserve, which is the only reason why I wanted to give some of those bona fides, because you should never just trust some random person you see on the internet, especially, make Erica great again shirt here. But no, I appreciate you having me on. And you guys can find everything at libertyadvisor.com for more information.
Hi, and I'm Etienne de la Boetie squared, and that is a nom de plume. I'm the author of a book called Understanding Our Slavery, where I'm exposing how intergenerational organized crime controls the government and the media. And in the book, I use a lot of visualizations, historical photos to take people. Oh, thank you. There we go. Tim Picciott is showing it in the background. But I use a lot of visualizations, images to make what was invisible visible, so you can kind of see the structure of what I like to call the real organized crime government, and also back everything up with an 8 gig flash drive that we call the Liberator, that is half evidence of government and media criminality, because it's the government and the media working together, and half is the solution of voluntarism, free markets, and tolerance and peace. And as way of bona fides, in a previous life, I used to work on Wall Street on the technology side, where I built networks for the financial industry for market data trading floor technology. So I've been on probably the majority of the trading floors on the East Coast, and worked, side by side with traders, and have a kind of better than average understanding of the market. So.
Awesome. We've got two incredible people here today, to say the least. So what we're going to really start the chat about is really an article that I think Etienne brought up to us just the other day. He posted, and it was about the repo market and kind of the hidden story behind that. So let's just start with what's going on with this repo facility and all this thing that the Fed has come out with. What's really the story behind this? Because the media kind of says that it's out there, but it's just some repo thing. But there's really a big story behind this, and let's get into that. So let's just get an overview.
Well, if I could start, I like to call it Repo Madness. It's sort of like a play on Reefer Madness. But what I think is important for people to first understand is they probably don't know what the repo market even is. They don't know what the Fed funds rate is. They don't know what the discount window is. And so it probably makes sense to kind of back things up, because people, probably even the average person out there has heard about the Fed funds rate, and they hear about, the Federal Reserve is going to cut rates, and the average person, all they care about is what's going to do to their, their credit cards, or what's going to do to their bank account, or what it's going to do to maybe they're getting a mortgage. But what that Fed funds rate really is that is the rate that if you are a bank and you go to the Federal Reserve directly to borrow money from the Federal Reserve. And so the Fed has something called the discount window, which is the lender of last resort. So what typically happens is that, let's say, at least in America, I believe the banks have to hold 10% reserves. So that's a fractional banking system that's then on top of a fiat system. So it's, crap on top of more crap is what we have. And so it's like a squared, so it's crap system squared here. And so right now, what was going on right around the time that when that supposed Iranian drone strike hit the Saudis, and maybe we can, and I'm sure probably 90% of the audience probably doesn't believe that story as well, but what happened is my suspicion is that some traders were on the wrong side of that. It probably then banks didn't have the collateral to then cover their obligations. So what will happen is some banks, let's say they have 9% at night, the other banks might have 11% in reserves, and so the bank that has 11 will then maybe lend 1% extra that they have to the bank that only has 9. And then generally what they do is they will charge something that is pretty much in line with the Fed funds rate. The reason it's in line with the Fed funds rate is because if you can go to the Federal Reserve and borrow money at 2%, and why is a bank going to charge 8% if you can just go to the Fed at 2%? However, almost no banks ever go to the discount window. I mean, the last time it really happened was 2008. And so what happened about a month and a half ago is that banks were in big trouble, and they didn't want to be tipped off that they were in a lot of trouble. So what they did is they didn't go to the discount window. They were going to the other banks, which happens every night, except the banks were charging each other up to 10% to borrow money overnight, which when the Fed funds rate is at the time it was 2 to 2.25, and since has been lowered 25 basis points. But if you could get it directly from the Fed at 2 at the time versus having to go out in the open market and get it at 10, why would anybody get it at 10? The reason you get it at 10 is because you don't want to tell everybody that you're in big trouble. And so what the Fed did is they gave an easy button for everybody, and they allowed everybody basically to go to the discount window and to get enough reserves. So then that way we couldn't actually have true price discovery and true transparency in the system, because absent the Federal Reserve in there jacking everything up, the true rate probably would be closer to 10%, and we would have never gotten to the situation where we have $23 trillion in bonds and government debt, which doesn't even include Social Security, doesn't include Medicare, which is a much, much, much bigger problem than Social Security. I know that's kind of a stunner for some people to believe. Doesn't include all the unfunded wars. So it's sort of like on your own personal balance sheet. If you're like, yeah, I'm doing great, and I am a financial advisor, so this is pertinent to me. But it's like if someone came to me and was like, yeah, I'm doing great, and I've only got $3,000 worth of debt. Like, well, if you don't count my student loans, you don't count my car payment, you don't count my mortgage, and you don't count food and energy and everything I spend money on, then yeah, I'm doing great. And so that's what the government does. So even that number is terrible. And yet that number doesn't even include all the stuff we just mentioned, which if you add all that stuff up, I mean, I've seen numbers as high as 200 trillion, what the actual unfunded obligations are. So this whole system is basically predicated on needing to roll over the debt at super low interest rates. And so the Federal Reserve can never effectively have rates go up, because as soon as and I've been saying this, I got in trouble for sending out an email back in 2011 saying that, listen, the Fed, yeah, they can raise rates, but as soon as they raise them, they're going to have to cut them again. And there's some slides I can go to a little bit later on, but, I probably have raised some questions there. Maybe let Etienne step in. But yeah, I just wanted to give a brief overview of what the discount window was, what the Fed window was, and some of that stuff. But yeah, last month it was starting to blow up because banks are paying 10%, which is just crazy. They only pay 10% because they had to pay 10%.
So, and I'll just kind of add to that and say that, some of this money that the Fed is injecting into the economy and the way that they're allowing these banks to borrow is something in what's called the repo market. And there's term repo market, and then there's the overnight repo market. And in essence, the borrower is going to pledge securities, usually their treasury bills or notes. And in exchange, they get the money for, in the overnight market, 24 hours. The term repo market can be as long as a year. They kind of typically average 3 months of loaning the money. And then you're going to pay back the money. You're going to get your collateral back, and you're going to pay like a little bit of interest for that money. Now, that's not a deal that everybody else can get. You can't get that from your bank. It's kind of like a sweetheart deal to the banks. And this money, as they inject, they raised the term repo from 35 to 45 billion, and then they increased the overnight market to 120 billion. And so that is new kind of fresh money that's coming into the economy that is then going to kind of bid up the prices of goods and services. And that is one of the problems with the entire crooked banking system. And I'll even take it back further than Tim did. And also the way that I usually, try and explain the criminality of the market is that banks lobbied and bribed Congress in 1913 to pass the Federal Reserve Act. The Federal Reserve Act created the Federal Reserve as a private bank, it's a private institution that's kind of a government-sponsored entity. And that private bank then backstops the money center banks, the JP Morgans, the Citigroups, the Wells Fargos, the kind of the big boys, and all the littler banks as well, to engage in something called fractional reserve lending. Tim touched on that, but in essence, the banks have to keep around 10% as a reserve, and then they can lend out money that they do not have, so that when you go to a bank to get a mortgage, or you go to get a car loan, or you go to get a student loan, that's not other depositor money. The banks just go, bring, and it's there. And they credit your account with these dollar credits, unlimited emissions for you crypto people following at home. And that new money that they create, that begins to compete with the existing dollars in circulation, and those dollars then begin to bid up the prices of goods and services. And so because the system was set up in this kind of fraudulent organized crime manner from the beginning, it requires more and more and more creation of debt to expand the money supply, to just be able to cover the interest payments and just be able to, to keep everything going. And it's the worst kind of money that you can inject into the economy, because it's not money that is being spent wisely. It's not being invested in plant, property, equipment by people that have earned it and saved it and have a specialty in their individual industries. It's not being spent by entrepreneurs. And so the whole system is now kind of crooked, and this is why we have prices that are rising. And the final thing I would add to that is that the official inflation rate is a joke. They have taken out energy, they have taken out housing, they've taken out everything except Japanese electronics, and then they massage the inflation numbers using a variety of like little sneaky techniques like hedonic adjustment and substitution. And so they've got all these kind of little techniques that they can use to screw the grandmas and the grandpas that are dependent upon Social Security, because now they don't have to give a cost of living adjustment, because they're lying to you saying that the inflation rate is much lower than it is. And there's a variety of different organizations that use kind of like there's one called Shadow Stats that uses the old measurement system of the Bureau of Labor and Statistics before it got politicized, and they began doing all of these different techniques to minimize inflation. There's another one called the Chapwood Index, and the Chapwood Index takes a look at about 500 different kind of consumer products, including things that the Fed's not counting. It's looking at rents, it's looking at Verizon, Fios, it's looking at average car prices, and that Chapwood Index, and it's also looking at it in different cities. So it's taking a look at the inflation rate in San Jose versus the inflation rate in Florida versus the inflation rate in Dallas-Fort Worth versus Kansas City, Missouri. And if you take a look at those, the average over the past 5 years in these different markets, because it's different in different markets, has been averaging 8 to 14%. And so the Fed's number one lying about inflation, and these policies where they're injecting all of this money into the economy This is inflationary, and it's stealing the value out of the dollars that people have earned and saved. Just as they might as well just come, slip in your house and steal it right out of your wallet. They're just doing it in a kind of sneaky Wall Street way that most people don't understand, where they're able to kind of obfuscate through, all these different layers of shenanigans. But the key thing to know is that the system is crooked. I believe they're waging a kind of economic warfare on the population. They're lying about the inflation rate, and what they're doing is inflationary.
Quote that said with the inflation that basically that inflation is something that not 1 in a million men will be able to detect, because it's this insidious hidden tax. And one of the things that Howard talked about, or Etienne talked about, was the hedonic adjustment. And so I just bought a brand new phone. I've got Ron Paul in the back of it already with the pop socket. But this new Samsung Note 10 Plus was like $1,200. My last phone was probably $600, iPhone 7. And even though my new phone's 100% more than the other phone, what they'll say is, well, this phone has like 12 gigabytes of RAM. Your last phone had 2 gigabytes of RAM, so it's 6 times better. So actually, the new phone is actually 80% cheaper. So even though it cost me 100% more, they'll say because of the features, it's actually cheaper. And I did write a little booklet on this stuff. So if Michael wanted to link it, and a lot of the stuff that Howard has talked about, and it's not even necessarily just like Howard or Eddie's book. It's not meant for necessarily the people out there that know this. It's meant to give to your friends and your family that don't know this. So I wrote a book called How It's Rigged, the Economy, where it goes over the inflation numbers and the GDP data, because then the inflation data then gets jacked in with the GDP data. And you can argue about, whether GDP is even a good measurement. And I'm sure everyone here would argue no, including myself, that it's not. But let's say the real inflation rate was really 5%, or it's probably not, it's probably higher. So I don't know, let's say it was 6, and the economy grew.
10. Let's say it's 10.
Yeah. Let's say the real inflation was 10%, and let's say the GDP grew at 5. Well, if the inflation was 10 and GDP grew at 5, the GDP number, the headline number, would be -5. And so that's one of the ways they jack with these things, is that a lot of the GDP numbers now that they quote at 3% or 2% is using inflation data that shows that we're at like 1 or we're at 0 or there isn't any inflation whatsoever. So if we use the true inflation data, and then they do the same thing with the unemployment rate. Even Donald Trump said over 20 times when he was campaigning, one of the times he said, this is the most phony fake number that's ever been invented by presidents to only make presidents and politicians look good. That quote's about 90% paraphrased, but that is basically what he said. And now he's in there and he's like, oh, look how great the unemployment number is for blacks and for the Latinos, and it's never been better. Well, there's so many things that used to count back then that didn't count now. And that's everything's in the book. If you guys want to text, what's the number? If you want to text Liberty Advisor to 71441, it will send you a copy of that book directly. It's only 18 pages. I could have made it probably 200, but I really just wanted. I couldn't find anywhere else that was like it out there, so I just decided I would make it myself. As you could probably get through the whole thing in half an hour, but it's meant for your friends, and you need to know it for yourself, so that way you can teach other people. Because it doesn't matter if we're all just sitting around here, circle, and each other. We got to be telling other people this information, because it's all this stuff is rigged, and it drives me absolutely nuts when all the Trump fanboys now are calling me a libtard because I'm pointing out this stuff when it's the same stuff I was pointing out when Obama was there, and they were loving me when I was talking about all that. But yeah, no, Howard's absolutely spot on with all this stuff. The other thing cheap money does is the money didn't go towards investments, didn't go towards research and development. It went so companies could then borrow more money and then buy back their own stock. And so like in the case of GE, I forgot the exact number. John Stice and I recently did a show on this, but it was something like they spent like $27 billion on stock buybacks at an average price that was like 3 times higher than whatever the stock is trading at. So it's like, like a snake eating itself for prosperity. And so if you take a look at who has actually purchased the stocks over the past like 5 years, almost all, you take a look at the graph, it's like straight up, and it shows the corporations, and then you look at pension funds, you look at individuals, you look at retail institutions, and it's all flatlined or even negative. And then it's all the corporations buying back their own stock, because when they buy back their own stock, it then lowers the amount of outstanding stock that's available. And so you can actually have a company that is making less money than it made before, but on a per share basis, it's making more per share. So then the earnings per share go up, the the CEO's compensation is usually tied to share price. And so a lot of CEOs, they might get paid. I mean, I know a CEO that gets paid minimum wage, but all of their but then if they were to hit certain numbers, they would make over $1 billion over the course of 10 years. And so guess what? They're going to have a lot of incentives to financial engineer these numbers as their stock option price comes to fruition. And so that's just another way that these numbers are rigged. A lot of Trump's tax cut just went to having companies repatriate their money. They use those funds and then buy back their own stock. And they've just financial engineered things. And I mean, we could take things all the way back to the Napoleonic Wars of how things really started, but I don't know if we've got that much time to cover all the history of central banking. But it is fascinating. I mean, I could probably give like the 2-minute version of it, but no, it's fascinating how much. And if it wasn't so diabolical, I'd say this is the most genius plan that's ever been basically created, because it's only a few of us. And now luckily, because of Dr. Ron Paul, there's millions of people that know about this. Because of G. Edward Griffin, there's millions of people that know about this. 10 years ago, hardly anybody knew about this, and now it's very satisfying that I talk to the average person in the airport or whoever, and usually I ruin their day when I bring up all this stuff, but at some point, a lot of people already know a little bit about this, whereas 5 years ago no one knew about this stuff. So it is I don't want to make it seem like it's all negative, because there is a lot of good information that's being shared, and people are finally starting to wake up now.
All right. Well, I got a couple questions that came to mind from what you guys talked about. One thing in regard to the repossession is these are collateralized loans that they're taking, and they're utilizing what, for the most part, is T-bills, right? So when the Fed is taking that collateral and giving them cash or repossessing them, they're putting cash out into those markets. So who are those people? Are they all banks, or are they countries that are exchanging these T-bills for cash?
Most of them are banks. Some of them are the Fed's primary dealers. And so if you're familiar with the primary dealer system, there's also a monopoly on who gets to sell treasury bills and notes. And so I think there's around 20 primary dealers, and these primary dealers frequently buy T-bills to, for their own accounts, because nobody is, if the auction falls short, then the primary dealer, kind of the deal is they have to own them. And so now they park them in their account, where they're paid interest on them by the taxpayer, which is another kind of scheme to, for of the fraud. And then when they need, money, then they give they quote unquote loan the T-bills to the Fed. It goes onto the Fed balance sheet. The Fed gives them money. They're able to, up their reserve requirement, or, cover whatever the financial shortfall that is forcing them into the repo market is. But it's mostly banks, and it's frequently what's called the primary dealers.
And so those assets that the Fed is acquiring are things like the T-bills. Though, the fact that those T-bills could be worthless is a whole nother thing, right?
Yeah. So again, it's intergenerational organized crime, and they're waging kind of financial warfare against the people. The government and the media are creatures of this organized crime system, and while the fraud of putting all this money as debt is bad, there's another fraud that's kind of famous, in the sense that the Social Security Trust Fund, or the Social Security lockbox, during the time that the Social Security system was actuarially positive, so it was taking in more money every month than it was paying out. Now it is either negative, or it's close to going negative. There's I'm not sure exactly where it is on the continuum. But when it was actuarially positive, they were taking all of the, they were taking the money that was supposed to be set aside to pay Social Security benefits, and the government was loaning it to itself. And so they created something called a special obligation bond, which is not like a corporate bond that is tied to, the income stream of a profitable corporation, where the corporation is paying the interest and paying back the bond out of its own, profitable operations. The bond that the U.S. government was selling essentially to the Social Security Administration is just an IOU from the government to itself. And so in West Virginia at I think it's the Bureau of Public Debt, I forget the exact city in West Virginia, there is a file cabinet. There's a laser printer and a file cabinet. It's a very nice file cabinet. It's fireproof. It has a lock, a combination lock on it, like a safe. And in that filing cabinet, they just print out a quote unquote bond, which is just like an IOU, and they put it into a folder, and then they take the folder and they put it into the file cabinet. But right now, that file cabinet holds 2.85 trillion, that's trillion with a T, of these special obligation bonds. That is just a complete financial accounting trick in and of itself, because absent the bond, the government has the exact same options that it does if there was a bond or there wasn't a bond, which is when it comes time when it's now negative to be able to pay Social Security benefits, the government can only do three things. They can either cut your benefits, they can raise your taxes, or they can do some combination of the three. And that's the exact same options they'd have if there was no bond there at all. So it's just a way of tricking the average person that isn't really paying attention or doesn't understand what's going on. But this organized crime system has stolen Social Security, and they've left a filing cabinet in West Virginia with $2.85 trillion of IOUs. And that 2.85 trillion, you can go online. You can, George Bush, you can see him Jr. actually stood next to the filing cabinet and said, "This is crazy. I can't believe this is going on, but it's not going to collapse under my watch." So you can actually see pictures of him posing with the filing cabinet. But these are just, other ways that the government is robbing the people, and they're getting away with it because, as I point out in my book, Understanding Our Slavery, it's the government and the media working together. The media is not telling you these things. If you go to CNBC, if you go to Fox Business, inflation is something that happens at night when fairies come and sprinkle pixie dust on price tags and gas pumps. They're not telling you the real cause of why your costs are going up. And so I look at it as the government and the media working together to hide these facts from the American people in a complete criminal operation.
Well, one of the things in regard to inflation, and kind of the modern version of inflation, is cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles and Seattle and stuff, where somebody that's making $100,000 a year can't find a place to live and has to live out of their car because the price of housing has gone up so much that they can't live. And although they might be able to afford some food and stuff like that, there's no way that they can have housing. So I mean, is San Francisco the way this is going to go for you guys?
I think that's an anomalous market. I think the better, the thing that's going to impact people the most is really, just kind of the rising costs of everything. And so, when I first moved, well, I live in kind of Northern Virginia, or I used to live in Northern Virginia until very recently. But now I've moved to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project. I'm in Florida right now. But in Virginia, where I've been for over a decade, when I first moved to town, I want to say the cost of a haircut at my local barbershop was $13, and it was $14, and it was $15, and it was $16, and it was $17. Now I think it's 17 right now. But in addition to kind of the prices that are kind of obviously rising, Consumer Reports has done an expose on how the big monopoly food companies have been hiding the price of inflation by reducing the amount of product that goes into the bag while they're keeping the price steady. So there used to be 24 slices of American cheese and kind of the big American cheese slice thing. Now then there was 22. I don't know what it is today. Anybody that's bought a bag of chips, of potato chips, at the grocery store knows there's less and less chips on a regular basis than there used to be in the bag. And so there's a lot of the inflation is being hidden from the public by the monopoly food companies that are kind of agents and allies of this criminal cabal that are hiding the inflation by just reducing the amount of goods you get for the same amount of money.
Yeah, and actually, I ended up finding that picture that Howard was talking about when it in reference to George W. Bush and the filing cabinet. I've never
Throw it
actually
up
seen.
there. Throw it up.
Yeah, we'll throw it up here right now. It's actually, if you go on to read this article, it's like quite ridiculous, and I've never seen this. So thank you for pointing it out. But here's George W. Bush and here's the filing cabinet that has all of your economic Social Security benefits in there. But yeah, you go on to read some.
By the way, if anybody's ever seen the movie Dumb and Dumber, where the briefcase full of IOUs explodes at the end, that filing cabinet is the federal government version of the Dumb and Dumber briefcase.
But yeah, this goes on to say a lot of people in America think there's a trust in this sense, and I believe this is Bush talking, that we take your money through payroll taxes and then we hold it for you. And then when you retire, we give it back to you. But that's not the way it works. There is no trust fund, just IOUs that I saw firsthand that future generations will pay either in higher taxes or reduced benefits or cuts to other critical government programs. The office here in Parkersburg stores those IOUs. They're stacked in a filing cabinet. Imagine the retirement security for future generations is sitting in a filing cabinet. And then the Social Security Trust Fund does not consist of real economic assets that can be drawn down in the future to fund benefits. Instead, they are claims on the Treasury that, when redeemed, will have to be financed by raising taxes, borrowing from the public, or reducing benefits or other expenditures. And another thing that I feel like a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of people give a lot of credit to Clinton for having a great economy in the 90s. Well, what happened is one of the biggest drivers of economic activities has to do with demographics, meaning the different populations. So the baby boom started in, I believe it was 1946. The average American spends the most amount of money in their lifetime at age 46. So if you add 1946, you add 46 to 1946, you get 1992. 1992 is when Bill Clinton was coming in, and then that was right when the baby boomers were hitting their peak earning power or spending power, which is even more important to spend money than it is to save money in this economy, because we have this whole back-assward system that we have here. And so that demographic started to basically peter out with the baby boomers when they turned 2008 is when the oldest baby boomers were starting to turn 62, at which point they would then be drawing down from the system. So it's not really a coincidence that there was a huge boom from, in the early 90s. I mean, obviously you had the internet and all this other stuff too. But if you back out this is where I was going with this point. If you back out Social Security payments from what's his name, Clinton's budget, he actually was running deficits. The only reason he had a surplus is because they were counting that money going into Social Security, except that was IOUs they put there, and they spent all the money. And actually, I had the Social Security office because I had a couple domains with Social Security in it, and the inspector general actually called me and threatened me and said they were going to fine me $10,000 per click if I didn't remove this one website. And it was just actually a parked website. And then I was like, all right, bring it, mother effers. And actually now I'll actually make a website, and I'll actually make it devoting to exposing you guys. But I made a virtual Social Security optimizer because there was a lot of loopholes people could do to get more money out of there. And I guess I was too successful helping people because then they shut down most of those loopholes. But yeah, I was like, I should just make this. I'm like, how about next time you guys come here, how about I put a bunch of real hardcore info about how you guys are screwing everybody? They're like, well, you could be masquerading around as a Social Security Administration. I'm like, listen, if anyone talked to me for 5 seconds, they'd realize that I'm not masquerading around as a Social Security Administration. So I was basically, screw you guys, and then launched the website. So, yeah, just because they pissed me off. But yeah, no, these things have been rigged 7 ways to Sunday, and I mean, there's just so many different rabbit holes that Howard or Etienne brought up that we could just keep going down and down and down. But I really think it's also important to kind of give the genesis of central banking. Really kind of goes back to, you had in the 1700s, you had what was actually the Bauer family, who teamed up with the Oppenheimer family. And the Bauer family they were goldsmiths. They would, more traditional non-fractional reserve banking, where people would lend them their gold and they would give them certificates back. And the Oppenheimer family is like, hey, well, it's a lot more profitable to lend money to governments. And so then there was a German prince that then had lent the Bauer family a whole bunch of money. And the Bauer family, their Insignia on their door was a red shield. Red shield in German is Rothschild. That's the Rothschild family up today. So a lot of people don't realize that's how the Rothschild family came into being. And then, and so that German prince had lent them all this money to buy English bonds. They ended up not buying English bonds. They found out Napoleon had lost the war. They spread a rumor saying Napoleon had won the war, brought the British stock market almost down to nothing. They were sitting on all this cash. They then bought basically the entire British stock market. Then they found out Napoleon had really lost that war. The value of everything went right back up. And then essentially since then, they took their 6 sons, put them to all the banking centers across Europe, like, Frankfurt and Vienna and Rome and all these other places. And basically at that point, they controlled everything. They got in cahoots with the royal family to then, for a long time, help control the Bank of England. They controlled the first central bank in America, whose charter ended in 1812. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear in here, but that's why the British came here and burned down the fucking White House in 1812, was because you fucked with their money, not because of whatever bullshit is in the textbooks. I mean, that is the honest truth of why that, and that's, no one talks about that. Then the second central bank of America was ended by Andrew Jackson. He had a guy put 2 guns to his head, and both guns ended up misfiring. It said it was wealthy Europeans that put him up to it. Then you've got even Lincoln, who said, I've got an army in front of me, that's the South, and I've got an army of European bankers at my rear, and I far more fear the army at my rear. I mean, so this stuff goes on. Because I know Howard's like, hey, I want to back it up. And I'm like, if you really want to back it up, then you can back it up even further than that. But that's just sort of the cliff notes. So I'd recommend people, read Creature from Jekyll Island to get a good synopsis of that. But basically, it's the biggest screw job that's ever happened. And really, what I thought would be sort of the big catalyst would be when the Fed loses control of interest rates. And they did lose, because all that Fed funds rate is the discount window, but technically the market should be controlling the interest rates. But when you have the Federal Reserve going in there and buying bonds, it then distorts what the true level of interest really is. And so there is no price discovery, there is no market discovery. And the best case scenario, and I mean, every scenario is bad, but the best case scenario, and Howard or Etienne had brought this up, is basically a slow bleed through inflation, where the central banks are able to manage this, BS economy they've created, and maybe we get 10% inflation, and over the course of 7 years, everything you buy, doubles in price. So, if you take 72 and divide it by the interest rate, that's how long it takes something to double. So at 10%, it would be every 7.2 years, the cost of goods would double. If you have a 30-year retirement, everything now is going to be 300% higher. And that's the best case scenario of how your retirement is going to end up. And so, that's one of the things I've been helping people out with, is trying to, how do you protect against, this sequence of return risk, meaning it doesn't matter if you average 10% a year in retirement, if you go down like 40% year one. And there's so many risks out there. This could be a 10-hour podcast if we got into all of that, but so I don't want to, I'll spare you guys all that stuff. But no, it's craziness that's going on. They lost control last month when the rate had to get to 10%. Which is why they had to print $180 billion last month in order to make, which wasn't quantitative easing, even though it took our country from 1913, I don't say our country, but it took from 1913 to basically 2008 to get an $800 billion balance sheet at the Fed. And now it just took 1 month to add, 20% of that in the span of, about almost 25% of that in the span of just 1 month, when we're supposedly not doing quantitative easing. And they just had this the other day, and they keep, reneging on everything. And I could pull up, if we go back to what the Federal Reserve said that they were going to do years and years and years ago, and I'm trying to see if I can pull this up my screen right now. But another key component of this is there's something called the dot plots. And what the dot plots are, it's the Federal Reserve governor's estimation of where they think the Fed funds rate will be, both later on this year, next year, the following year, and then the longer term. So in 2012, they were saying that by 2015, 4 years ago, we would have been at about 4.25%. And so, I mean, and then 2014, they said, okay, by 2017, we'd be at about, 3.75. And then by December 2016, it's like, okay, well, by 2020, we'll be at 3. And guess what? All along, I've been calling their BS that they couldn't do it. And that's exactly what's going on. And the other reason this is really, really dangerous is and I haven't looked at this, these are charts that I made up January 2017, and it was called the Trump effect and why good news is bad news, where I basically predicted everything that has happened the past 3 years. And Etienne's been following me for a little bit, so he's seen me on Ernie's show and knows I've been talking about this stuff for a while. But one of the things that's also really important is there's something called a PE ratio in stocks, which the layman's term is it's basically the more expensive, the higher the PE, the more expensive something is. And right now we're in that fifth quintile where the forward 10-year return historically when we've been at this ratio has only been 4%. So if the true inflation rate is 6 or 7 or 10 or whatever, and you're only going to earn 4, which how that 4 is probably going to shake out is 1 year it'll be down 40, then it has to march back up. And so right now, you're buying stocks at an elevated level. There's no way they can ever basically ever get the Fed funds rate back to a normal level. And this is another chart which there are updated ones I've seen, but going back to, you take a look at the Fed, they stopped printing money December, basically the end of 2014. As soon as they stopped printing money, look at this line in black. That's the European Central Bank. So it's this hot potato where we stopped printing money. So then as soon as the Fed stopped printing money, then the ECBs had to start printing money. Then the Bank of Japan had to massively up their game, up their program. And then they were trying to talk about, okay, well, as of last October, they said we're going to be selling $50 billion bonds a month. I had podcasts going back over 2 years pinpointing that time frame as calling BS out on it. Because I'm like, okay, how are you guys going to sell $50 billion a month in bonds when you've got to finance about a $1.2 trillion deficit? So that's $100 billion a month. The Fed's $50 billion a month. Who's been the biggest buyer of bonds? It's been the Federal Reserve. So, okay, the biggest buyer is now going to become the biggest seller. Then who's the other biggest buyer? Okay, China and Japan. Well, China, we were in a trade war with them. So are we going to say, hey, I know we're trying to, do all this, all these, trade war stuff with you, but by the way, we need you to pick up your slack and buy even more bonds. No, that's ridiculous. Bank of Japan they're the most indebted country basically in the world. They actually just go print up money and buy up their own stock market. The Bank of Japan is the largest owner, I think, in all of the Nikkei 100 stocks that they have over there. It's just absolutely craziness going on. So this whole artificially rigged scenario. So some people, the criticism might be, oh, well, you were predicting a recession a little while ago. Well, no, I was predicting that the Fed was never going to be able to do what they said they were going to do. And I gave too much credit to the average slave out there thinking that they wouldn't be this dumb to get to the point where we have $17 trillion in negative interest rates, global bonds. And I didn't even, and as pessimistic as I could be, I never thought we would have gotten to that situation of having $17 trillion in negative rate bonds. But here we are. And
Tim, in regard to the negative interest rates, just a quick little tidbit on that. If there is a marketplace for debt and cash is really the necessary thing, I could see how we could get to negative interest rates. Because if people want cash now, if countries need cash, if people need, money to buy bombs and stuff like that to keep their people at bay, this is what's really going on. Is they're throwing out the cash, and they're creating a negative demand for the debt instruments. But like you said, all this money and all these developments, China, for example, China's economy has really been based entirely on like $25 trillion in debt that they've incurred over the past 10 years or so. And so all this false economy that's going on around the world, when the dollar collapses, is that going away, or is it are people just going to?
Yeah, I'll throw in here. So first of all of these governments are all organized crime governments. They're all using the technique of statism. In my book, I expose 20 plus techniques that the Nazis, the Soviets, the East Germans, the US use to create the culture of, what I like to call tax slavery, and the idea that there has to be a government, that it's legitimate to have a government, that that it's necessary, that it's desirable to have a government. And all this is really being done and force-fed to, students in mandatory government schools so that they never learn the reality of the money system, the fraudulent nature of the money system. And all of these countries are running the exact same playbook on their individual, tax slaves. So it's not really, China versus the United States, or, United States versus Russia. It's really the governments of China versus the people of China. It's the government of the United States, organized crime system, versus the people of the United States. and the governments just play each other against one another to give the population a boogeyman that then unites the population behind the government to save them from the artificially created boogeyman. And so that system, is what keeps the government in power. And while the government is in power, they're forcing people to use their rapidly depreciating fiat paper tickets. They're forcing people into the stock market through the 401k, their 401ks, and the kind of their tax policies. They're creating all of these economic distortions. They're creating malinvestments. They're stealing a significant portion of the national income, and they're wasting it on unnecessary wars, waged on manufactured intelligence and lies. But the main thing that it does is it's allowing these banks to reap these fantastical quote unquote profits. I mean, amazing profits. This is why the bank is the biggest building in every single city on the planet generally. And that those profits are what have allowed them to buy up the media and buy up the government, so that the only information that the people really receive is distraction, children's sports played by adults, and deception. And nobody is really explaining to the people how they're being robbed, the extent of it, the extent of the illegitimacy of the government, the complete criminality. Like it doesn't get any worse. Like you can't, you've stolen, the entire retirement savings of the country, and you've left 2.85 trillion in these worthless IOUs. I mean, this is a level of wholesale criminality that is completely being ignored by this weaponized media system.
Absolutely. Yeah, I want to touch on a couple things in regard to, so what does the people in our community do? What would be the smart things to do? I know there's things that they're trying to push down to make it look like that things are normal, and those things are probably the things to be buying. But what is your guys' suggestion in regard to understanding what the landscape looks like now, where it's going? What should people be doing to put themselves in a better position?
Well, a lot of people, you have to remind yourself that most people don't have anything, so they don't have anything to lose to begin with. So for them, it's probably more important that, let's say you live near a beach and you've got your friends and family and everything goes down in value and you never had anything to begin with. I mean, there could be a certain shakeout period here where, things could get really bad. So, then that gets into having, the guns and gold and all that stuff. But, it could be getting down to simple things. Like I'm friends with Ernest Hancock, and he's got chickens and all sorts of other stuff in his backyard, that aquaponics and hydroponics that could help, sustain yourself. And so, if you don't have a lot of money, maybe investing in chickens or something like that could be, one way. But if you have let's say you've got $1 million 401k and you're, stuck living in a big city somewhere, then it becomes, well, I need to make sure that my $1 million still can retain its purchasing power. And then that gets into a tricky situation where everyone's going to have a different answer. It depends on, does you and your wife, do you have any income sources coming in right now? How much money do you really need? How much money would you like to have in retirement versus what you absolutely need to have? And then we need to find ways to make sure that we can cover what you need without having to be exposed to one of these rigged systems going down, 50%. And I think there is a limit to how much the Fed is willing to let the markets go down. And I think that limit is 20%, because that's what happened last time around Christmas time, is when they had the plunge protection team and everybody else, getting together and everyone getting on the same page. And that's why, and the reason the market went up this year is because there was so much bad news, that the bad news meant that the Fed was going to cut rates, which was good news. And so before I was saying why good news is bad news, and now it was why bad news was good news. But at the end of the day, you probably have like 10% of Americans might have enough money in stocks and 401ks and IRAs that even makes a difference. I mean, the average person out there that has, $50,000 in a 401k or IRA, if it's even that high, it doesn't matter if they go down 20, 50%, because they weren't going to retire off their $50,000 they had anyways. And so, so unfortunately what's going to happen is people are going to beg for a solution. the solution is probably going to be something like the Libra, except I think the Libra got too big for their britches, and even though they're pretty deep state, that they aren't the state. And so I feel like basically the major powers that be want to have their own version of the Libra, which is really modeled after the special drawing right, which is a whole nother subject, which actually I predicted the day before the Libra and it was announced their underlying holdings. I actually predicted it would be modeled off the special drawing right. So the ultimate goal is for things get really bad, people beg for the government to help, the ones that mess everything up to begin with. That help is going to come in the form of a digital currency that's going to be tracked, traced, and surveilled. They're probably going to marry that up with some sort of social credit engineering score, so that way they cut you off. And that really was, sorry, I got to call coming in here, but that really was the game plan, was to, eventually, because Paul Warburg, the creator of the Federal Reserve System, said, we shall have a one world government. It's only a matter if it's through consent or conquest. And so they realized that, beating people over the head through world wars isn't a great way to do it, that the better way of doing it is through getting people to ask for it. And so like Rahm Emanuel said, you never let a good crisis go to waste. So by the way, Paul Warburg was the person who, what's the guy's name? Daddy Warbucks in the play Annie was actually based off of him. And so, all this stuff, history, sort of repeats itself. And it's really my goal has been to get people to not beg for their own enslavement. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to, people, unfortunately, the average person out there is going to beg for the exact same things that made it a lot worse. And that's why having your own crypto that's, private, something like, and I am a financial advisor, so I got to make all these, provisos of talk to your own financial advisor. He probably sucks, so talk to me. So, something like Monero, something that can't be, that is private, because eventually they're going to come and they're going to try to shut off your money. If they don't shut off their money, they're just going to steal it through inflation. And so we have ways right now, if you did have a large 401k and you are in that situation where and I came out with a video the day before Jerome Powell said we're on autopilot last year, saying what I would do. And what I did was I invested a small amount into put options. So it's sort of like buying homeowners insurance. If the price of if your home burns down, this helps build your home back. If your home doesn't burn down, then you go up, because ultimately I think one of really two things happens: either the market goes up or the market goes down. If the market goes down, then I think it's only a matter of time before central banks print a bunch of money, and then you see the value priced in dollars go up, only because we print a whole bunch of money, not because things are actually going great. So you could take things back to Germany. 1911, 1912 Germany, their stock market was like 1 to 400, and by 1923 it was 27 million. It didn't mean the average German was doing great. It just meant that they now all of a sudden, it costs $1 million to get a loaf of bread. And so that's probably what's coming on an eventual timeline. This might be a little counterintuitive, and I might get some pushback from the comments on this one. I actually think the dollar is going to get stronger throughout all this before it eventually collapses, because people always do the wrong thing at the wrong time. If you had inside information that I forgot if it was Moody's or S&P that downgraded the debt, and I think it was like August 3rd, 2011, or August 2011. One of those agencies downgraded the debt. If you had advanced knowledge of that, at least from a textbook standpoint, what you think is, okay, now it's the U.S. debt is more risky to hold. It should hold a higher coupon payment to pay me for holding on to that risk. And what happened? The price of government bonds so the interest rate actually went down, and people were actually flocking to it, even though now the rating agency said it was actually riskier to do. So I actually think that there will be a temporary period where people will be crowding into the dollar, will make it even stronger. But then, people always do the wrong thing at the wrong time. Then that will then but if they don't have the balls to then get into stuff that then collapsed in value to then hold on to their purchasing power, if they weren't into gold or crypto or other assets, or they didn't have, land, then who knows? There's a lot of ways it can shake out. I think I've got a lot of solutions for people in the crypto space and, freedom, anarchy, libertarian space to help them out. But, you can't help everybody, but, the first thing you got to do is, help yourself and help others get educated. And for me, I'm just trying to tell people to not, accept whatever mark of the beast coin that's eventually going to be coming down the pipeline.
I'll throw in with that and say, in my book, Understanding Our Slavery, I specifically say, I like beans, bullets, and Band-Aids as your primary wealth. And so to me, the big danger in the government, continually creating this, ridiculous amount of dollars, and going to have to be able to create the dollars in the future to pay these 2.85 trillion in special obligation bonds for Social Security and the interest on everything they borrowed before and all of the other financial chicanery, that eventually people stop accepting the dollar. And then all of these dollars that foreigners in many countries that are, some of them are dollarized, some of them are forced through kind of dollar hegemony and the petrodollar to buy and hold dollars, to buy oil that is priced in dollars. Eventually, if that falls apart, which it's already, kind of developing some cracks in the system this month alone, the Russian oil company moved completely away from the dollar to the euro. And so on the outer lying edges of the empire, that's already starting to happen. But if these dollars come flooding back home and all of a sudden the dollar won't buy anything and all of your assets are in dollar denominated assets and the dollar either collapses or the dollar gets a Argentina type 40% haircut, loses 40% of its purchasing power, you don't want to have all of your eggs in dollar denominated assets. And so some of the options that I like are physical gold and silver in small denominations of a recognizable hallmark. So I like mercury dimes and 1 ounce silver rounds that you would be able to kind of transact with, because people understand that, and in a collapse you could immediately start the economy with kind of the asset-based coins that are already in circulation. People know what they look like. They're able to tell which ones are silver and which ones are base metal. I like cryptocurrencies for the same reasons that Tim outlined. They're an inflation-proof way where the government not only can't tax and trace you, but also they can't reach into your bank account the way that the government can reach into your bank account today and just say, oh, we say you owe us money, so we're going to take that amount of money out of your bank account. Your money is not safe in the bank from the government because the banks and the government are in on it together, and it's organized crime. Also, you're in danger of what's known as a bail-in. And a bail-in, they kind of beta tested in Cyprus, last decade, where everybody that had had deposits in Cyprus banks all found out, oh, you're bailing out the bank. Everybody lost 12% of your money, and they just stole 12% of the money out of everybody's account. And so cryptocurrency allows people to have kind of like a bank account that the government can't reach in and steal from them. So I think that that's good. But really, the main thing that I'm worried about is a collapse of the currency or a major devaluation. And in some ways, I actually think that if you take a look at the policies of the government, it's almost like they're trying to get to a collapse. And perhaps they're trying to get to a collapse because more and more people are figuring out how the game is rigged against them. More and more people are pointing in the direction of the bankers and the politicians and saying, hey, it's these guys over here. More and more people are using the term organized crime for government. Derek Bros, who's running for mayor of Houston, pointed out that even on the local level, it's the government and the local media are keeping alternative voices out of the human race, out of the mayoral race. They're keeping alternative voices out, and the media is operating in lockstep with the government in an organized crime system where it's the government and the media working together. And so if the government knows that the posse has figured out who's robbed the bank, and the posse is saddling up and getting ready to go after them, do you want the posse to be safe and secure and well capitalized, or do you want them to be dead broke living in a militarized police state? And so what if we just move our three-card monte game over to China, where they've got a stricter kind of slavery, way more, like their slaves don't think that they have rights, don't believe that, their slaves are completely disarmed. And we just collapse Farm 50, because these are, just think of the different countries as different tax plantations where human beings are being farmed for labor. And we'll just move the game, to some other tax farm, and we'll go farm them for a while. And we may lose, a percentage of our dollar-denominated assets, but we're not going to get our, thrown against the wall or guillotined when everybody figures out that we've stolen their retirement, we've stolen their Social Security, we've stolen their, the value out of the money that they saved and they earned. And so I'm worried, you know, there's a small portion of me that's worried that this complete debasement of the dollar might be their overall plan, because we are the most well-armed society in the world. We do have the most powerful military. And if we ever got control of it back, then we could go wherever on the planet that these people are hiding, and we could claw it back, and we could, you know, get the money. And so if it does collapse, it won't be because they mismanaged the dollar. It will be blamed on some kind of external event that gives them the justification to shut down the internet and begin censoring communications. So it may be cyber warfare or a nuke going off in a city, or it'll be something. It won't be that it collapsed because they printed a gazillion of them and people didn't want them anymore, and the inflation got real bad. It'll be, oh, look at that terrorist bomb or that cyber attack, and that's the reason why the markets are closed, and that's the reason why the banks are closed, and that's the reason why we have to censor the internet. And so, I recommend people, you know, have the basics: beans, bullets, and band-aids, and then non-dollar denominated assets.
Man, I gotta say, Etienne's always so on point right there, because he did mention bail-ins. There, I can actually show you right now on the Federal Reserve's own website, and this is something I found back in 2014, where, you know, it talks about you know, Swiss and Swedish regulators have already gone far in raising capital requirements, including by requiring bail-inable secondary holdings of capital. Now, this wasn't the original speech. I was trying to find this on the fly. It's funny because I can't find this speech on the Federal Reserve website, even though I literally saw it like the day it came out on their own site. But this was Stanley Fischer, the vice chair of the Federal Reserve, who's actually an Israeli citizen, which why is another citizen at the chair of the Fed? Nothing to do with Israel. Just it's the fact that, you know, it's any other country, someone is controlling the money. But this was his quote: "As part of this approach, the United States is preparing a proposal to require systemically important banks to issue bail-inable long-term debt that will enable insolvent banks to recapitalize themselves in a resolution without calling on government funding. This cushion is known as a gone concern buffer." And this is something that I can vouch for, that I have seen this on the Federal Reserve's website the day it came out. I just happened to stumble across this. I really didn't see it picked up anywhere, but this is the plan. Now, the other important thing to mention is, and I forgot, is even if we only had, because Etienne mentioned, if things were managed better. Well, it doesn't matter how you manage it. They're managing our own slavery, because right now, the very first dollar that was printed December 23rd, 1913 had 4% interest on it. So if you owe, at the end of year one, you owe $1.04, you only print $1. How do you pay back $1.04 with $1? You've got to borrow another dollar. And so it's this whole fraud where, because the money is based off of debt, that you can never actually get out. You can never get out from underneath paying it. There's a whole lot of other layers of how they do this, especially when you get into quantitative easing and how the big banks just front run things. I've got a video called, you know, "Why We're All Slaves of Central Bankers" that I just posted on my YouTube channel. It's not on Wham yet, so that might be a reason to subscribe, and you guys will see that. I was hoping that Howard was going to maybe add booze and maybe boobs to that list of B's, because you had a whole bunch of B's of things that you know, what was it, the beans, bullets, band-aids. So I was like, all right, if we add booze to that, it could be another good list. And no, it's, yeah, a whole bunch of other things I could ramble on about, but no, I definitely appreciate you know, the opportunity today. I know it's always great being on with Etienne, because just you know, half the stuff he was saying was like, oh man, this is what I was planning on bringing. Like, I just made notes about bringing things up. You know, I think one note I made that I forgot to say earlier was, you know, we talked about financial terrorism. I actually referred to Ben Bernanke. I would call him Osama Ben Bernanke. Was how I would refer to Bernanke. And now, actually, because of Etienne, I actually refer to these as government schools, not public schools. So you had an effect on me. I'm calling it government indoctrination centers, not public schools anymore. And I'm trying to use more of that vernacular and use more of the, I mean, what's going on now makes the mafia look like nothing. I mean, it is the mafia, but whether it was the Italian mafia, whether there was the, Russian mafia, or the Jewish mafia. I mean, all that pales in comparison to what is now the government mafia of what's going on.
Yeah, gentlemen, I really appreciate, we're at our time limit here, but I really appreciate your guys' point of views on this stuff. I feel like, I think one of the things that we do need to mention is in regard to an understanding of how to develop relationships and trust with other people is one of the things that, like when you're able to work with your neighbors and stop from being turned against your neighbor, the whole system and scam that they've got going on falls apart, because when we work together, regardless of what the situation is, we can take care of ourselves. And so that's certainly something that we need to keep in mind. And that's one of the reasons that I'm so interested in kind of, outlining who our community is and how we can help each other. Just to close on this, you guys have a ton of skills and abilities and knowledge to share with this community. And, I think you're a tremendous resource for our community to have. What are some things that you see that people need that you guys provide that you'd be happy to kind of lead them down that path to get the knowledge that they need? And we'll close out with that.
I am a wealth advisor. I go by the Liberty Advisor. So I know it's sort of a dirty word to be a financial advisor in the libertarian community, but I did see that there were different, especially when it comes to crypto, there's different trust strategies where you can legally avoid all the extortion that goes on if you got into Bitcoin or crypto early. So I help people out with that, and then they can help create foundations and basically make everybody except for the IRS better off. I offer crypto IRAs, just general wealth management consultations in terms of, hey, I'm 55 years old. I want to retire in 3 years. I see all this stuff is about to blow up. What do I do with my money? So I help out people in our community with those questions because, it is important. They've worked their entire lives. There's really not anybody else that's really out there like me, with this type of message. And so my grandfather said when I was starting off, he's like, don't bring up all this crazy shit and don't bring up stuff from Creature from Jekyll Island and forget they ever read that book because no one's ever going to want to do business with you. And I decided, okay, well, there's probably, millions of people like me, but there's no one in terms of how they think, but there's not any financial advisors who have the balls to actually say this stuff and actually try to change things. So I'm the guy when it comes to that stuff. But the main thing I've got tons of information out there for free. So, if you go to thelibertyadvisor.com, upper right-hand corner, there's a thing for show, and you can, I recommend not following me on YouTube. I'd rather do something like BitChute or have like an RSS feed going into your phone for, podcasts that we come out with. You can find me on World Alternative Media from time to time. But again, not everything gets out on there. It's heavily shadow banned. For live stuff, I use DLive, really trying to promote, decentralized alternatives that can't be taken down. Because I had a Facebook page that went from 0 to 32,000 people within 2 months, and and actually now it's almost down to less than 30 because I've been shadow banned, and they've completely taken away my ability to reach people on that platform. And I don't really want to build up any other enemy platforms because I know it's just going to be taken away from me there. And so, I got tons of information on all sorts of different subjects, mainly economics, geopolitics. I've got a video where I was sort of trolling Peter Schiff, where I called it Tim Picciott was right, where I, predicted Trump winning, predicted, the Trump effect, why good news is bad news, even the Libra thing that was going on. I mean, all the interest rate stuff that was going on. So, if nothing, you don't have to be a client of mine. You can get a bunch of good information and share it with other people, because ultimately, if people don't know what's going on, then they don't know how to fight what's going on. And I used to be a big end the Fed guy, and now I realize, well, hey, with cryptocurrencies and gold and silver, you can ignore the Fed. They're going to end themselves. I don't need to waste my energy to end them. They're going to end themselves. I just want to convince the average person out there not to beg for the consent of this, Goldman Sachs.gov coin that's eventually probably going to be coming down the pipeline.
So Etienne de la Boetie, as we kind of talked about, I'm the author of this book called Understanding Our Slavery. And what I really try and do with the book Understanding Our Slavery is give people in the liberty community a tool that they will be able to use with their friends and their family that has been kind of scientifically designed to appeal to the 65% of population that are visual learners, and that you can take family and friends through a kind of very high level understanding of the techniques used by Nazi Germany, the US, the Soviet Union, East Germany, whether it's mandatory government schools, whether it's youth programs where kids get awards for, how to caress the flag, whether it's youth programs that militarize children, the pledges and the oaths, the military and police are artificially glorified and celebrated. And most of your friends and family, because they're visual learners and because human beings are real good at pattern recognition, once they see the pattern, then they're like, oh, that's a pattern. I never understood it that before, but now that I see the pattern, you've now made something that is visible invisible. This is an example from the book. If I told you they were using religious symbolism in their propaganda, you may or may not believe me. But if I show you 36 examples, you're like, hey, that's not an accident. That is, that's on design. The other thing I try and do is I try and make what was invisible visible. And so if I tell you that 6 corporations control, control over hundreds and hundreds of subsidiaries to give the population the illusion of different information, you may or may not believe me. If you're trying to tell your friends and family, they may or not believe you. But I'll tell you what, if you show them a media ownership chart, not only are they going to believe you, but they're going to come to that, way more like a deeper level of understanding than not. And so that's what I'm trying to do. The book is called Understanding Our Slavery. You can download it for free at understandingourslavery.com. I'm sold out of the 4th printing. I'm about to go into the 5th printing of the book, the 4th edition. You can place a back order on the site right now. But you can also download it for free. And you can also, like I said, you can make a Liberator flash drive for your friends and family. I showed one earlier that's an 8 gig drive, but you can make one using your own USB drive. You can make them using DVDs, and that information has the book on it and has all of a lot of the evidence of some of this criminality that we've been talking about. And so you can give it to a friend or a family member, and it's got documentaries, it's got short videos, it's got the dankest liberty memes out there. And so you can download that for free at understandingourslavery.com. And I thank you for letting us talk to your audience. And I hope this was helpful for everybody in understanding what a criminal system that we're unfortunately embroiled in.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much. And one last thing I guess I'll ask you is, are we going to see you in Anarchapulco this year?
Yes, I'll be down there. I'm haven't finalized if I'm speaking yet this year, but the last 2 years I've spoken at the TDV Dollar Vigilante Summit that was right before in Anarchapulco. But yeah, I mean, I would say if I was a betting man, I'd say 99% chance, God willing, that I will be down there.
Yeah, and not only will I be there, but we'll be doing the Turtle Party as a fundraiser for my foundation, the Art of Liberty Foundation. Again, last year we had almost 400 people. This year I hope we can push it to 500 or more. And so get ready for that. I'm not a confirmed speaker yet, but hopefully I can make it to the main stage, since I've had the best-selling book at Anarchapulco for the past 2 years running. And so we'll see if I make it to the main stage this year.
And I'll give a plug too for the Turtle Party, because I think the first year I was supposed to go to a party at like Vich and that somehow got, I think as we were hanging with Joby, somehow that fell through, and then we ended up going to the Turtle Party. I'm thinking, oh man, here I am going to a stupid Turtle Party. And I went there like, this was actually awesome. And the next year I was encouraging people to go, and everyone who went there who hadn't gone the year before was like, oh man, this is awesome. And, you did a great job emceeing it. And then they also had Liberty Beats was there with, or Liberty Rhyme. I forgot they did an awesome job as well. But no, I was thinking, as, being, a guy, male, full testosterone, thinking, oh man, a stupid Turtle Party. I don't want to go to that. And I didn't really know Etienne at the time. And I think actually that's where I first met you, was there, like, oh, hey, Tim, because you'd heard me from Ernie's show.
It was, yeah. It was you, because you were with Ernie. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, it's like the first time I've been recognized anywhere. No, I thought, so that was cool. I mean, I was the average guy out there thinking, okay, stupid Turtle Party, it's not good. But yeah, awesome location, great cause, and I had a really good time. So.
Yeah, being that I live in Acapulco, one of the things that I say is if you've witnessed a sunset 3 times in Acapulco, you're probably going to be back. And the Turtle Party is certainly an opportunity to watch that unbelievable sunset that happens every single day here. So, and I really appreciate you guys, coming on. I really would like to continue this discussion at some point, because one of the things that Howard is famous for is that big poster that says, government is organized crime. talking about that would be something I would definitely like to do a little bit more of in depth and kind of hash through maybe some of the things that you talked about in regard to your book and some of the visual things that people could really look for on their daily routine, where they start to realize, holy cow, it's yeah, here we go. So I guess we'll